Welcome, community, and thank you for attending this year's Shopware Community Day. My name's Dominic, and today I want to be talking about the Shopware Store API. So you might think, gosh, what a dry topic, APIs, and yes, I'm with you. Sometimes it's quite hard to talk about APIs, and it might be boring in points, but bear with me, I'll try to make it as interesting and as engaging as possible so you guys don't get too bored about this. So I want to start by kind of motivating and taking a step back and thinking about why do we need APIs and what do we use them for. In the second step, I want to be talking about how the Shopware Store API works and why it was built. And in the end, I want to show you, and that's the fun part, how we're going to use it, and what new features you can expect from the Store API. So I started working on this talk, and I asked some of my colleagues and friends and people from the community what comes to their mind when they think about APIs. And the answers were quite various, ranging from different API paradigms or API schemes like REST or GraphQL or things that you do with APIs, right? So they were quite various. However, they had one thing in common, which led me to conclude APIs and developers are probably good friends. But thinking a little bit further outside the box, some other people might think, what does that even mean, right? Because most of those words that my colleagues and friends and other people said were mostly tech jargon. So normal people can't really relate to that. And that made me think, okay, maybe we should take a step back and think about what the problem is that we're trying to solve initially, okay? In order to do that, I would like to phrase a market analyst who's working for Forrester. His name is Joey Sigman. And he's quite a technical guy. However, he once put it like this and said, consumer or customer experience is first and foremost. And that may be sounding like a pretty flat sentence. But in the end, this is quite key. So at the first point, you might think about, okay, I'm doing tech and I'm writing code, so why should I really care about consumer or customer experience? Usually there's other people that take care of this, right? Designers, content managers, and so on. However, if you think about it a little bit, everything that we're building as developers will at some point be used by customers, will be used by consumers. So not only when it comes to user interface design, but also when it comes to API design, we have to have that at the back of our head when creating APIs. So in order to illustrate that, I'd like to take some examples from mails which I got over the years who were kind of related to that idea of building customer experience. Which I responded to afterwards. So those mails were along the lines of, can I use Shopware in my existing single-page application? Or how should I integrate Shopware into my brand website? Or a very common one was, can I use React? And the one that I probably got most often was, but we just need the checkout. Okay? So all of those questions kind of have something in common because they target a point where Shopware intersects with the customer experience, where tech intersects with the customer experience. And my answer was usually along the lines of, well, looks like you might have to build this yourself. However, that's no problem because Shopware has got a very open architecture. We're built upon Symfony, so you can create your own kind of business logic. You can build it into that. We've got a great theming system, and you can do all of that. However, that doesn't quite solve the entire problem because usually in projects, merchants or customers have lots of different systems, and these systems need to work with one another. And that kind of led us to the idea that we have to provide business logic and provide interaction or interfaces for Shopware at a way lower functional level. And that's what we did using the Sales Channel API, which you might have heard of before. The Sales Channel API, for the ones who don't really know what that is, I'd like to summarize it. It is essentially built upon our core, and it's a set of things that we found to be required in order to build headless, customer-facing interactions. So those are ranging from interacting with the card, through registering a customer, logging in as a customer, searching products, placing an order, all those things that a shop can do, a customer can do inside a shop. Okay. So we had those functionalities, and then we turned them into endpoints. You can see that very unacademic visualization of how we make the piece of business functionality and turn that into an API endpoint, because that's going to be important afterwards. However, there was a small problem because we did that in a rather non-inclusive way. And please let me explain what I mean by that by using a little example. So let's take a product detail page. What does a product detail page contain? Usually we'll have something like a title. We might have something like a gallery, a price, probably a description or a set of information about a product, maybe some cross-selling items. And the way that Shopware handles that is that we have a set of lower-level internal services that fetch that corresponding piece of data. It might be a little bit over-idealized, but we have a separate service to fetch the gallery images. We have a separate one to fetch kind of cross-selling items and product information. So these lower-level services are then called by a higher-level service. We call those page loaders. And then they take all the data together and then hand it to a template. And that's technically a very nice approach to do it, because it kind of hides the complexity of your software, of your system, under abstractions. And that's really great. However, let's take these different services and put them under another to get to my point about inclusivity. So thinking about a product detail page, we have these things that might be placed on a product detail page, but there might be something else. There might be a product configurator. There might even be a CMS page. Okay. So if we now take the endpoints from the Sales Channel API, which we've seen before, and place them next to that, and if we now think about, we would like to build a product detail page, but as a separate application, right? So we need the API to display a product detail page. Now, what we'd have to do is we would kind of have to have all these services on the left side, all that data on the left side, to be present within one endpoint, because none of the other endpoints really provides any product-related data. So we would have to fit all of that into that one single product endpoint. And that's not really something that you would like to do, neither is it something that you should do. And it's certainly not the way that we did do it. However, that kind of constrains us because, for example, our product endpoint contained data about the product description and the price information. But as soon as you were starting to have maybe cross-selling items or even a content page, there was not really a way that you could fetch that through the API. So we sat down and kind of thought about this. And what we ended up doing was essentially just taking the services on the left side, and you see this magic slash again, the API-ification of a piece of logic. So we took those services on the left side and exposed them via the API. So by doing it this way, we kind of inverse the control, because we said, okay, we're going to split all that logic on the left side up and make it available via the API. So then when we're building our application, which is on the right side, the application can use all that data from the left endpoints, but in a very fine-grained manner. So if you need cross-selling items, well, you're going to fetch them through the API. If you don't need them, you don't. Easy as that. In the end, we called these services on the left side, or these API endpoints on the left side, routes. And that's essentially the way that the Store API was born. I'd like to take one more example to show how the Store API works by starting with a very abstract example. So let's say we have a piece of logic that fetches a product list. So usually you have an input, something like a search criteria that describes what kind of products you want to fetch. But we don't really care about where those products come from. Maybe they come from the database, maybe they come from Elasticsearch, or from some other source. We don't really care about this, okay? So let's just take that for granted at this point. And then we have a so-called product listing route. The product listing route is one of the instances that we saw on the left side on the slide before. So this product listing route is a service that we can call, and this returns us a certain type of object, which would be a product listing response or something like that. So we'll have a encapsulated method that gives us this piece of logic. And the interesting thing about this is that this product listing route can now be reused in multiple places. So, for example, we're using this product listing route in the Store API because essentially we're just exposing it via HTTP. But we're also using this very product listing route on our product detail page. And we're also using it on our product listing page. Okay? So on a detail page, it might be used to fetch a list of cross-selling products. On a listing page, it might be fetched to, well, display a list of products, essentially. And maybe you already get the kind of benefit, but just let me take some time to focus on the benefits that this new architectural pattern brings to us. So the key benefit is certainly the generalized exposure of business logic via the API. And that's a pretty big thing, because it means that every time that we introduce new logic into our application, we have a generalized way that we can expose this logic to the API that any outside system that interacts with our system can use them. And that ultimately brings a lot of freedom, especially to front-end developers, because they are usually the ones that are using the API to build applications, customer-facing applications, or customer experience based on that. Of course, since we have this functional atomization, we have a way better overview of what kinds of our business logic we have already exposed via the API, and that gives us a great way to kind of measure functional coverage, and also in the end, as we've seen on the slide before, to reuse that and also to test that. So you might be thinking, why were we making a new API for that? And I can absolutely understand that, but I want to take a moment and explain and elaborate on why we did that. So having this new API, as you might expect, required us to do some rewrites. They weren't as significant as you might think. However, they were in a way that was not applicable to our versioning system for the Sales Channel API. So we decided to make it a new one. Also, it meant that we can keep compatibility for the existing Sales Channel API, because we're not touching that, right? We're maintaining the Sales Channel API, but now we're focusing on the Store API, and that gives time for us to transition all the functionality into the Store API. And in the end, of course, we were able to provide a new approach and more freedom due to the reasons which I've named before, and that gives a way more cleaner and more solid architecture of our product. So you might think, what does that mean for my code? If you have some existing code, if you have already worked with the Sales Channel API, or if you have been providing custom endpoints through the Sales Channel API, what does it mean for you? So first of all, as I said, we are not deprecating the Sales Channel API yet. Okay? Yet means that we are working on having a full functional coverage of the Store API with respect to the Sales Channel API. But we're not at this point yet. And as soon as we are at this point, we would be deprecating the Sales Channel API. But until then, it's just going to exist next to the Store API. So if you think about transitioning or about refactoring your code, what you would have to do would be to rename your endpoints in the first place, or create new endpoints that contain your existing business logic. Then you'd have to make sure, of course, to expose your mid-level services via routes, which I've named before. Mid-level services are the kind of functional atoms that I was talking about before. Something like cross-selling items, something like a gallery. Let's say you're building a certain plugin let's say, creates stores and a map of stores. So that might be a piece of business logic fetching these stores that you can expose through the Store API. So you'd have a corresponding endpoint for that. Then you have to return data transfer objects following a certain pattern. For example, you have to extend the Store API response, so Shopware can infer the correct type for that response and make sure that you get the correct fields and that you get the correct response, and can use some of the features which I'm going to show you now, actually. So at this point, we have managed to finish the hard part of the presentation, and now comes the fun part, because we're going to see how to use it and what kind of features we have in the Store API. So starting off rather easy, I'd like to show how to authenticate or how to identify against the Store API. And in this example, we are making a post request to fetch a certain category by its ID. And you can see that we just have to provide the SW access key header and provide the access key, which we can get from our sales channel configuration in order to identify ourselves against the endpoint. And you can get this Shopware access key in your sales channel configuration, which is in the admin, but you can also get it when you're either creating a new Shopware instance and you're generating a new sales channel, or you can do it straight through the CLI, and then you would get an access key which you can use to identify. So another thing that we introduced was Sparse Responses or includes field. And that's a very powerful feature because it allows us to shrink the responses down to the very fields that we need to run our application, our front-end application. So let's say we just want to display a list of categories for whatever reason. I'm not going to question that. But let's say we just want to display the name of the categories within that list. So we could add an includes field to our request body, and inside of that includes field, we can specify the name of the entity, which would obviously be category in that case, and then specify the name of the field that we want to show within a list. Okay? So the corresponding response for that would look like this. So we have the almost minimal response that we would expect from that, plus this little API alias, and that's going to be important. If we, for example, look at SEO URLs, SEO URLs are not always something that you need as a front-end application, but in sometimes it might be required, okay? So we decided to make it optional and have an additional header that allows you to include SEO URLs for your entities. So for categories or products, whenever you fetch them and this SW include SEO URLs header is set with a non-zero value, you would receive the SEO URLs, otherwise Shopware simply wouldn't give them to you. So what I did was I extended the category list by the SEO URLs field, because we have to include it, right? Otherwise we would still just get the name. And the response would look like this. So we still get the name, and then we also get the SEO URLs field. And then inside of that, we get a lot of data, which is all part of the SEO URL, to be honest. But we might not need everything of this. And this is where the API alias gets important, because you can see that the SEO URLs has the API alias SEO URL. Okay, so we can take that alias and put that into our includes object as well. So that would look like this. We have SEO URL, and then inside there, we just specify the name of the field that we want to fetch from the corresponding object. And in that case, our response would again be shrunken down to SEO URLs and only providing the SEO path info, which we need at this point. So that's pretty neat, but probably the biggest change that we have introduced, or the biggest addition that we've introduced, is a whole lot of new API endpoints that encapsulate business functionality that you can use within your application. So they are ranging from account management related things like resetting your password, setting a default shipping address, of course some things like placing an order or paying for an order, fetching categories, fetching CMS pages, all of that, yeah, you name it. So you can use these new endpoints to build very custom front-end applications based on that. using JavaScript, using Flutter, using some other native platforms, whatever you wish. There's really a lot of possibilities that you have. So with that, I'd like to come to the end of my presentation. So in case you got excited, I strongly suggest you head to our developer documentation at docs.shopware.com, head to the developer section, Shopware 6 developer section, and go straight for the Store API guide. What you can also do is install our NPM package, Shopware 6 client, which gives you a set of interfaces that you can use to build your own JavaScript applications based on, which is a very, very handy tool to work with the Store API. And if you didn't have enough, just stay around for a while. There's going to be 2 more talks today that kind of cross paths with the Store API. The first one will be by Pierre, who will be talking about building UI component library-based front-end applications with Vue.js, which will be very interesting. And then there will be another talk by Patrick and me, and we'll be talking about the thought process and the design process behind the Shopware PWA. And with that, I'd like to thank for your attention and wish you a great Shopware Community Day. Thanks.